Thank you, gentlemen, for your appearance here today. General Thomas, let's start with Syria. We've talked a little bit about the state of the fight there and the great advances our troops have made, a little bit about what will happen when our troops depart Syria. One thing that's been on my mind is all the bad guys that are currently being detained in Syria. Some of your colleagues have testified before the committee that number would go into the hundreds. We don't have to be any more specific here in that setting. They've also testified that while some of those detainees are frontline untrained cannon fodder, some of them are also external operation plotters and master bomb makers and other really bad guys. Is that your understanding as well?
Senator, without getting into specifics on the numbers, it's actually closer to 1,000 than it is hundreds. Already in detention with more to potentially come. A huge area of concern for us, especially because they're being maintained by the non-nation state that's otherwise known as the Syrian Democratic Forces. So how we resolve this foreign fighter, mostly foreign fighter detentions from, I think, I lost count, but it's in the dozens of countries that have contributed to it. But how we reduce that threat and have those people properly detained and handled over time is of paramount importance right now for the problem.
Yeah, how are we going to do that?
A pretty aggressive action right now, Senator, ongoing with State Department and with other partner nations to specifically reduce that threat. I'll give kudos to some of the countries, a surprising number of countries who have recently stepped up, some of the smaller countries that had capacity challenges, but that have nonetheless assumed the burden, or started to assume the burden, and we, with State Department primarily, are trying to assist them in reducing this problem.
No, it's not in your area of operations, but we have empty beds at Guantanamo Bay, don't we?
Yes, Senator, we still do.
Maybe we should consider that for some of those really bad guys in Syria. While we're talking about Syria, let's contrast Syria and Afghanistan, or specifically Afghanistan against some of the other places where we have a serious terrorism threat. The President said a couple weeks ago that we're going to have troops in Iraq for a while, in part because we need to watch the counterterrorism threat there, watch the threat of Iran. That's right next to Syria in places like Yemen and Somalia. We obviously have freedom of action on the seas for a lot of your troopers. Contrast the CT mission that we have in Afghanistan, which is, I think is 800 or 900 miles from the nearest sea, and the challenge that we would face there if we significantly drew down our troop presence in the conventional forces for your forces in special operations.
Thanks, Senator. Truthfully, we look at it in a global context. So in Afghanistan, and as Senator King pursued earlier, the external threat adversaries have been greatly diminished, and we're focused on them specifically. There's a larger counterinsurgency effort that is into its 18th year, but with a specific focus to support Ambassador Khalilzad's efforts to drive that event to reconciliation. So, a distinctly different, as you mentioned, problem, but correlated in terms of the global threat and their connectivity.
It'd be hard to get after those terrorist organizations, though, in Afghanistan for your troops if we didn't have some kind of physical presence in Afghanistan. Isn't that right?
Senator, access and placement are key, and again, something you can't establish in a hurry necessarily if you leave it. I probably failed to answer Senator King's question earlier. The way we look at the current context is very similar to 2011. So the recent annual assessment we did reflects on 2011 when al-Qaeda in Iraq was badly down but not out, and we pulled out of Iraq at that point. And we know that in less than 2 years' time, they were ISIS, running the deck through Nineveh, running the deck through Anbar. So how we finish that threat, or at least contain it going forward, is of critical concern.
And what's true of our troops is true of enemy forces as well, right? It helps them to have a safe, secure physical base from which they can carefully plot attacks outside of that base.
Yes, Senator, they thrive on sanctuary, and they're actively seeking sanctuary right now if they lose their toehold in Syria and other places.
Thank you, General Thomas. General Nakasone, a quick question about the 5G network. We've discussed this many times before. What is the status of your conversations with counterparts around the world to the threat that Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE pose to our telecommunications networks?
Senator, for fifth-generation wireless on U.S. Cyber Command, we have certainly talked with our partners and our allies with that. In terms of the Director of National Security Agency, of which I am, we have also worked that through the Department of State as they've made engagements with our allies throughout the world.
Thank you. My time's expired. General Thomas, I don't think you'll be appearing here before us again. You are smiling at that, I can tell. I want to thank you and thank your wife, Barbara, for many years of carrying the rucksack of responsibility for our nation. You have more than earned the opportunity and the privilege to pass it on to the next man.